It's the first ever AfriCaribbean Trade and Investment Forum in Bridgetown, Barbados. The event with the theme, One People, One Destiny, Uniting and Reimagining Our Future, seeks to bring the continent of Africa and the Caribbean under one umbrella and forge a relationship that cuts across trade, investment, socio-economic development and history. Hello and welcome, I'm Akin Obakeye, and I'll be bringing you the highlights from Active 2022. Deals signed, agreements reached, forming a binding relationship between two continents with strong historical ties. The three-day event saw key government representatives from Africa and the Caribbean and private sector players come together to brainstorm and chart a way forward for growth and development across the continents. Barbados, with a population of nearly 300,000 people, has developed into a major tourism hub where visitors from all walks of life come to visit, do business, and admire the cultural bliss. This time around, these visitors from the private and public sectors of Africa are here for a more purposeful engagement to forge ties with the Caribbean. Kickstarting the event, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, believes both continents have the capacity to make a defining difference while calling out the creation of air bridges between the regions.
We face common battles, from the climate crisis to the COVID pandemic, and now to the third aspect of it, with respect to inflation and debt that threaten to tear too many of our countries apart and threaten to put back into poverty too many of our people. In Africa, 1 in every 2 people in rural communities and 1 in every 10 in urban communities are recorded as being poor. In the Caribbean, recent statistics show that numbers have gone from 1 in 6 and 1 in 5 to as high in some countries as 1 in 3 because of the food insecurity and because of the disruption of the last few years. Tourism and travel-dependent economies, whether in Africa and the Caribbean, have literally been thrown on their backs. And we seek to fight this battle of bridging and reclaiming our Atlantic destiny on both sides at the very time when the travel and tourism industry is facing its greatest challenge in decades. In particular, the travel industry that still is reeling from the impact of sick leave and COVID. But we can choose to record that that is but another major battle. Or we can say, as my country has done, even in the midst of an IMF program, that if we do not seize our destiny now, we shall never seize it. We have within our capacity to remove, as I reflected last year on the 7th of September as I closed my statement at the African Union, to remove the middleman, to remove the middle leg, and forever to remove the scars of the Middle Passage.
In his opening remark, Professor Benedict Orama, president of the Africa Export-Import Bank, announced the bank's intention to work with Caribbean governments to set up a Caribbean Exim Bank with an investment of $700 million.
Our two regions, we have forged an unbreakable bond that opens direct links
enabling the Caribbean to receive a fair share of tourism receipts from African tourists, for example. We will want to live here with actionable proposals on how to open air and sea links between the Caribbean and Africa. We would like to live here with concrete plans to open banking and payment trails, to see joint ventures for industrial projects, to deepen our commercial collaboration in the creative and cultural space, including how to collectively protect our intellectual properties, to share knowledge and jointly invest in climate adaptation projects, and to create institutional arrangements that will enable capacity building and greater daily engagements amongst ourselves. We want to live here clear in our minds regarding ways to catalyze manufacturing investments in the Caribbean, to take advantage of the $27 trillion North and Latin American markets. We must collaborate in the healthcare space so that shortages of qualified healthcare professionals can be overcome. We hope to live here with AfriCaribbean not only serving as the Exim Bank for Africa, but also for the Caribbean. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all these will require funding, investment, courage, boldness, and careful planning. That is why we are most pleased to have made tremendous progress in accelerating the membership of the CARICOM nations in AfriCaribbean Bank. AfriCaribbean Bank envisages committing an investment of $700 million in the Caribbean as soon as a regional office is opened, building on the $250 million we already have established to support trade between the Caribbean and Africa.
Also addressing the opening ceremony were the chairman of CARICOM, President of Suriname, Albert Muchanga, the African Union Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry and Minerals, Amadou Hott, the Minister of Economy, Planning and International Cooperation of Senegal, Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM Secretariat.
We have significant challenges on the African continent, as many of us know, over the last 60 to 65 years. In general, the over-reliance on export of primary commodities, which we are trying to change, smallness of national economies, lack of industrial depth in some parts of the continent, and all of these challenges that have existed for many, many years, our heads of states and government said we need to respond in a way that will be forward-looking, that will make the African continent globally competitive, that will make the African continent an industrialized continent that creates jobs for young people and that contributes significantly to the global economy and global output. That is why today we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, because in the wisdom of our heads of states, they understand very clearly that the AfCFTA seeks to consolidate a market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion United States dollars, which is projected by the year 2035 to be close to 7 trillion United States dollars. That is to say, combined consumer spending as well as business spending. So it's a very significant market that presents very, very compelling investment opportunities, which we would, of course, invite our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean to consider.
This forum is a noble undertaking. The shifting geoeconomics demands that countries and regions broaden and deepen linkages with other countries in order to create stronger platforms for inclusive economic growth and sustainable development, as well as resilience. This becomes more paramount as economies around the world face multiple threats of recessions, unsustainable debt burdens, reduced flows of finance for sustainable development, climate change, and among several others, global supply chain disruptions. Africa and the Caribbean have a long history of collaboration. And the latest, which came up in the statement of the President of the African Export Bank, is cooperation through the Africa Medical Supplies Platform. With this forum, we are now focusing on moving to the next and higher level of deepening trade and different investment exchanges between the two regions.
The geographical location of the Caribbean, which is at the crossroad of Europe, Africa, and North and South America, is also a major asset that should be leveraged. Meanwhile, Africa is a region that offers the highest return on investment, an affordable, skilled workforce, attractive economic prospects, and abundant natural resources. Africa and the Caribbean, united under the African Continental Free Trade Area and the Caribbean Community, will constitute the world's largest market by 2050, with over 2.5 billion consumers. Our leaders are well aware of these challenges and opportunities, having set important milestones at the September 2021 summit, which brought together 69 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, given the aforementioned advantages, all we need to do now is to leverage the value and expertise of our respective human resources to develop innovative instruments that can boost our investments with a view to producing more tradable goods and services.
The event also witnessed the signing of partnership agreements between AfriCaribbean and 5 Caribbean countries to promote, accelerate, and support trade and investment opportunities in several areas of cooperation between Africa and the Caribbean. The event saw the signing of a total of 14 agreements and memorandum of understanding aimed at deepening economic ties between Africa and the Caribbean. Key among the signing was the partnership agreement between the African Export-Import Bank and 7 Caribbean countries. This partnership agreement sets the platform for increasing trade and investment ties between the two regions and sets a framework for cooperation to promote and finance South-South trade between African countries and Caribbean countries. Meanwhile, different panel sessions were on course to chart a formidable path and tighten loose ends across key areas from industrialization, investment, trade, economic relations, among others.
Global manufacturing output is estimated about $500 billion. Africa's contribution is just under 2% from Egypt, Morocco, South Africa, and Nigeria. And at the same time, we are exporting over 70% of all our commodities and raw materials unprocessed. So it is very natural that we need to contribute, we need to transform, we need to manufacture on the continent for our own economic development. And we can only do that by investing in the infrastructure of special economic zones and industrial parks.
Gabon at some point, after the crisis of in 2008, and they decided to diversify the economy away from oil only, and so this is how we decided. We figured that there's a lot of food in Gabon. We can actually convert the economy, the Gabonese economy, from a total oil exporting economy to an economy that is, producing locally some wood. And we negotiate with the government, and we establish the condition to gradually progress toward an economy in Gabon which will lead the processing of wood in Africa and globally. So after, it's been 10 years that we've been operating this industrial zone today. And I mean, Gabon is ranking today as the first African producer of veneer and the second global producer of plywood. So this is a kind of added value that, you know, the industrial zone can bring. And we are, like you said, we are duplicating that across Africa now. We are today working with Togo and Benin, and we are doing the same thing. We discussed with the government. We identify the commodities, you know, that can be industrialized at large scale, and we structure the project, and we work with banks to put in place the financing.
We just signed the establishment of the AfriCaribbean Business Council, which is really based on the real business linkages. What is present in the Caribbean, what is present in Africa, and how can we really add value to those with reference to how the commodities in Africa, how the transfer of technology, and how value addition, like we were talking about the fishery. We have received actually some requirements from Caribbean in investment in the shrimp, transfer of technology, the fishery, which already, for instance, in Africa, in Egypt, we have very big companies which is into this domain. So that's really how we create the business linkages. The Africa Business Council actually is about the strategy of strengthening our African private sector based on 3 pillars. The first is private sector strengthening, including SMEs, women and youth. The second is policy advocacy, and the third is product development. So if we're talking about policy and economic zones, how we can have policies that really promote incentives for investment to be in economic zones. Recently, we had a visit to Egypt in the economic zone, Swiss economic zones, which really targeting local content, but also the technology and international requirements like investment in green hydrogen. And we all know now that green hydrogen is a very, very trend that everybody wants to acquire. So the whole issue of the economic zone is to make a mapping exercise of what's existing on the ground and how we give policy incentives for the investors in order to invest and to have to create jobs, because it's all about creating wealth and creating jobs. So our partnership with Caribbean is really about what is present in the Caribbean that we can add transfer of technology, and what is present in Africa that we can export and import with a creation of jobs, with private sector strengthening, and how those business linkages will really foster our relations as Africa-Caribbean.
We have micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. They haven't done well in international trade, particularly in our regions, unlike, for instance, in the Asia-Pacific region, where more than 50% of micro and small firms export. But in our region, less than 10, and in a good year, less than 15% of micro and small firms export. And that goes to the infrastructure issues that I think we need to put in place for micro and small firms. And a lot of that comes, first of all, because that's where they learn to trade within the region. I don't want to leave here without stressing that. And one of the things that we need to fix is whether we're going to make a decision that special economic zones and firms that benefit from them are eligible for originating treatment, for qualifying treatment within the integration grouping. That is a big issue. If you ask me, that's the elephant in the room. If we don't do that, what's going to happen is that the countries and the regions that do have eligibility for firms that benefit from special economic zones will continue to trade. Scope, the ability to produce and to reduce costs across a number of different products, and scale, the ability to produce the same product, but in larger magnitude. They will continue to dominate our trading sphere until we are able to make those decisions so that our micro and small firms can learn to trade and then can trade with each other.
So conflict resolution is usually part of the package that a special economic zone should offer, because it's going to help the zone run smoothly, and also, of course, it's going to be attractive to foreign investors. The reason being that foreign investors and also companies working inside the zone are often unwilling to go to national courts for their disputes, because they don't necessarily know the legal system. You have to remember that a special economic zone takes you out of the jurisdiction of a state, pretty much. It often has its own set of regulations. And so yeah, it's a special zone. So the local courts are not necessarily and not at all actually the appropriate forum for dispute resolution. So you will use what we call alternative techniques of dispute resolution, such as mediation. And I believe everyone pretty much understand what mediation is about: overcoming the conflict, putting an end to it by finding a solution, or arbitration, which is actually a substitute for court adjudication. So special economic zones are challenging from the point of view of ADR practitioners. Why? Because often they require specific adjustments to the offer that arbitration centers like mine can make. Often you need to have some hybrid mechanism to actually accommodate for the presence of SMEs, the fact that in the chain value you really want to go fast. One dispute can actually get you off the tracks and seriously disturb and undermine the productivity of the industry. And so that's something important that you want to think about and that you want to put in place with the right experts. And I know that the Jamaica Special Economic Zone has actually one of these mechanisms in place.
The AfriCaribbean Trade and Investment Forum 2022 concluded with a commitment by participants to remove the scars of the past and build a commercial bridge towards forging a prosperous future for Africa and the Caribbean. In the communique presented at the end of the forum, the partners pledged the concrete implementation of strategic partnership between the business communities in Africa and the Caribbean.
Stressing the critical importance of enhancing trade and investment ties between Africa and the Caribbean as the key drivers of integration between the two regions. Having examined the immense opportunities for cooperation and the major structural challenges to enhancing Africa-Caribbean economic collaboration, being cognizant that fostering economic and social transformation in Africa and the Caribbean will require substantial financial and non-financial resources, recognizing that economic diversification through an inclusive and sustainable development agenda that builds upon Africa's and the Caribbean's resource potential is dynamic tools for poverty eradication, economic resilience, and structural transformation. Acknowledging the synergies between the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the vision of the Caribbean community towards unity, integration, and prosperity that is centered on its people. Hereby, reiterate or resolve to achieve goals and objectives of industrialization and sustainable economic development through mutual cooperation to reduce Africa's and the Caribbean's vulnerability to domestic and external shocks. Reaffirm our commitment to strategic commercial partnerships between the business communities in Africa and the Caribbean, with the objective of fostering bilateral cooperation and engagement in trade, investment, technology transfer, innovation, transport, tourism, culture, and other services. Commit to the upgrading and diversification of our economy's productive capacities through boosting of trade and investments between Africa and the Caribbean, as well as easing constraints to trade finance, trade services, and trade payments in the two regions.
Now, the signing of the partnership agreement is expected to usher in investment to concretize the commercial relations between the two regions, with an immediate focus on establishing an air bridge and business-to-business matchmaking through the newly established African Caribbean Business Council. That's all we can take on this highlights. I'm Akin Obakeye. Thank you for watching.